Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 News. Sergio Perez has responded to calls within the media to have Red Bull rescind his seat going into next season, saying that he gets treated more harshly by the media than his counterparts the likes of George Russell, who have also had a difficult spell of races, even going as far to say the media treat him this way in part due to his ethnicity. Is this true? Do the media misrepresent these situations? And also, will Red Bull actually take action on this and make any changes after a very difficult couple of weekends for their second driver? Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. This is the contract database really for the drivers. Perez's deal ends in 2024. And next season's going to be mania. Stroll, I don't think we really know, to be honest, what's going on with his deal. It's like, it's a strolling contract, if you know what I mean. It goes on and on as long as they want it. But we can see the Ferrari guys, yes, Norris is 25. Piastri just got extended. Albon as well, he's going to be a big free agent, I think, after 2024. Alfa Romeo, it's all going on next season. But the question is, are we going to see anything this year? Is Sargent going to get replaced, or are Red Bull going to make a move for Perez? I don't think they will do anything before Mexico, but if he has an absolute shambles every weekend, they've got to think about it, surely. Let's say he even loses P2 in the driver's standings, which would be really unthinkable given the strength of the car, but it's definitely possible as it stands. Hamilton's only 33 points behind. Red Bull might think, you know what, McLaren are getting close-ish. Mercedes and Ferrari are going to explore our concept next year. Max is probably still going to win the drivers, but the battle for the constructors will be made, you would think at least, way more difficult next year if this current Max-Perez gap remains itself, and therefore they should be looking at other options. Now, Christian Horner says that this rumour over the last couple of days that Lawson has been effectively guaranteed a seat somewhere in 2025 if he agrees to be the reserve for another year, he's actually said that's not true. There's no guarantees of anything. He's done a great job. He's really impressed us. Now, you never really know whether what Horner is saying here is completely true or not, to be honest, and there were some pretty credible sources saying that Lawson has only agreed to stay, in part because they've told him he's going to get a seat. Now, you'd think that will be at AlphaTauri when Perez goes after next year. Maybe Ricciardo steps up to Red Bull. Maybe they get somebody else in instead. And that's where there's been big talks really about a potential Perez replacement. There's a few names that have come around. Obviously, Danny Rick could have been a legitimate option had he not had his broken hands, because Lawson's done very well, but I think it would be too much to put Lawson straight in the Red Bull. Ricciardo would be a legitimate option, and might still be if he really has a stellar close to the season when he returns, we think, in Austin for probably the final 5 Grand Prix of the season. Austin, then it's what, Mexico, Brazil, Las Vegas, and then Abu Dhabi, I'm pretty sure, to close out the season after Qatar. So if he has a really good job, there's definitely a possibility that he gets the chance, but it's more than likely going to be the year after. The other name that was going around, of course, let's not forget, is someone outside of the Red Bull pen, and that is Lando Norris. We don't really have an update on this yet, and even Norris has said that despite the progress they've made, and yes, Norris has been close to winning on a few occasions, but, you know, Max just didn't DNF. His car survived, and therefore he won. So Norris has had a few chances. He's got close. If Max had some sort of issue, Norris would have had a win by now. But he did say that their car is, because it's similar to the Red Bull, but it's obviously not as good, it's good at the circuits that the Red Bull is good. So what they were arguing is, like, at Qatar, they should be really good at Qatar, that McLaren, but the Red Bull also should be good at Qatar because of the characteristics, and therefore it's going to be better than the McLaren. So even if the McLaren are better than the rest, and some weekends McLaren will probably be ahead of Mercedes, Ferrari, some weekends they might still be behind, but when they are better than those other competitors, they're still significantly behind Red Bull because their strengths are similar. So Norris knows that they're still a long way away, realistically, from actually beating Red Bull and challenging for a victory over a season. So that then raises the question, even as Horner said just the other day, that Norris is obviously a big talent that you're keeping an eye on. And it wasn't that long ago, let's not forget, where there were big rumours. I mean, this was, what, the 5th of September here, so a few weeks ago now, where everyone was saying, oh, Lando to Red Bull, it's going to happen. And even Mr. Monster Antibodies Nico Rosberg said that, where is Norris going? Next year already, I hear there is a switch coming. So we haven't really heard any more on this yet, but yeah, it was a few weeks ago that Norris was being linked all of a sudden to Red Bull, and even Rosberg was saying that his sources were telling him that this was going to happen, but as yet we don't think it is. Now, sure, The week after that, Perez did a decent job, got the points necessary, Monza, they got the 1-2, congratulations. But since then, it's been an absolute shambles, let's be honest. Now, Perez and his wife actually had another daughter recently, so congratulations to the both of them. And this is one of the things that, Helmut Marko has said before. He's like, Checo's a father now, he's got other priorities, he's not fully focused at Formula 1, this type of stuff. And he also made comments with regard to Checo's ethnicity, and we'll unfortunately have to get into those again in a second here. But the reality of the situation is, Perez is getting trounced. I mean, you look at the highest combined quali race head-to-head of the season. Albon Sargent is 30-1. Verstappen Perez is second, 28-4. And then I guess you've got Alonso 27-3. When you consider DNF's reliability, stuff like this, and it can't always be perfect to compare across the two of them, but still, Perez is not having a good time. I don't think people expected him to have a good time, but after the first two races, people expected more of a battle. And to be honest, that's why I think in part he gets as much criticism at the moment as he has been, because let's be honest, that Red Bull will go down as one of the best cars ever built in Formula 1, at least compared to the competition. They've absolutely nailed it. It might not be the fastest car ever, that's going to go to the W11, but in terms of race pace differential, the Red Bull is on par, if not will be in position to be the fastest F1 car ever, effectively. And Perez is doing this type of stuff. The last 7 days, at least as of this tweet, weren't great. I mean, Singapore wasn't great. He killed Tsunoda's race, and maybe that was a racing incident, but it probably wasn't a move you needed to make. Smashed Albon out of the way. Did the same thing to K-Mag in Japan, got a couple of stupid penalties in there as well, and the results weren't great. I mean, quali was P13 in Singapore, sure, Verstappen was only P11, and then P5, 8 tenths off Verstappen in Suzuka. That was just bad, and then he DNF in the race, an absolute disaster class. So, a few weeks ago, you'd have thought, it's surely impossible for Perez to lose his seat. But now all of a sudden you're thinking, well, it's not actually out of the question if Danny Rick has a really good end to the year, or if they actually could do a deal with Norris. And there still are some rumours suggesting that could be the case. So of course, as you'd expect, after these two races, the media was going pretty hard on Perez, right? And, we saw from Formula 1 and many other publications saying, Perez isn't up to the task at the moment. I'm not exactly sure what's happened because, used to be good in race conditions. Now his racecraft is nowhere really. He's going for these crazy dive bombs on Hasses. It just doesn't really make any sense. Seems to have lost his way quite significantly, and he's catching a lot of criticism, and people are saying, look, maybe it's time for Perez to go, either from the team or just to call it a day in the sport and retire. Teaming with Max takes a toll on any driver that has tried, pretty much, and Perez is another victim, and I can't help but feel like next year, if the trend continues, might be even worse than we have this year, to be honest, if Perez does come back for another season. And Jolyon Palmer, who just a couple of years ago was doing, quite a lot of content really from the Formula 1 side on how Perez's racecraft was pretty good, and then we see, a few days ago, he made a very critical analysis, and for good reason, of Perez's performance. And even George Russell was throwing the dagger in. I actually didn't see these comments at the time, but this was after Monza, where Russell said, basically, their car was so quick. He made a point of saying, when he spoke to reporters afterwards, I was surprised how long it took Checo to pass with the superior pace of that car. So even Russell was turning the knife a little bit. Yes, Checo got P2 that weekend, but still, he was like, look, he's not got the racecraft that Verstappen has, for example. And this is now where Perez has responded. Because over the last few days, lots of calls. Perez has got to go. Norris should come in. Ricciardo should come in. Lawson should come in. Tsunoda should come in. Just get rid of Perez is what a lot of the media have been saying. And look, I think naturally, when you are in the best car of the last however many years, at least relative to the competition, and people don't want to see, generally, the same guy win every week. And if you are the teammate of that man, you are going to get a lot of criticism if you can't win a Grand Prix. That's just how it goes. If there is going to be a best car on the grid, as there usually is most seasons, that's how Formula 1 works, typically people want to see at least those two drivers have a bit of a battle. Yes, you might not, one driver is usually going to be clear, a Hamilton-Bottas scenario, he's going to win the vast majority of races, he's going to out-qualify the other guy 70% of the time, but at least it's not all the time, at least there's some sort of fight. When Verstappen's beating you every quali, every race, forever, unless there's safety cars in play, you're going to get criticised. It's just how it is, and yes, it's Max, and yes, it's the way Red Bull designed the car in some respects, but Perez should be doing better. I think there's nobody really that says otherwise, and therefore the media have been going pretty hard on him, and I get it, to be honest. So this is what Perez says. basically saying that Russell should also be heavily criticised. Let's not forget, Russell had a bit of a stinker in Singapore, right? I gave him the Donkey of the Day award in the race, because I think I had to, really, and it's not like Perez had a good race in Singapore either, but, you know, he did at least get some points. Yes, he booted Albon out of the race, the Tsunoda incident, but, you know, Russell did get Donkey of the Day that day, and as Perez says, he crashed on the last lap fighting for second, but nobody talked about it. Which isn't really true. I mean, lots of people did talk about it, to be fair. When it happens at Red Bull, there are immediately 300 media saying you have to be replaced. So this is pretty interesting, right? Like, if Mercedes, let's say this year, it was the Mercedes that was the dominant car by far, and it was Hamilton versus Russell for the title, but Russell was bottling it, you know, bidding it in the wall, making mistakes as he has done this season. Obviously, he had that retirement earlier on in Australia, which cost him some points as well, and he's quite a long way off Hamilton. Would Russell be getting heavily criticised more so than he is now? For sure, right? When you're in the best car, I think naturally the media is going to criticize you if you seem to be, you know, just completely having a bit of a meltdown. So, you know, maybe there is an element of it that Russell would get away with it because British bias or whatever you want to say from the media, and Perez doesn't get away with it. But at the end of the day, at least Russell is generally closer to Hamilton in terms of even qualifying as well than Perez is to Max. So, and he also goes on to say, but I think that it also has a lot of influence that I am Mexican, which is a very interesting statement. And to be fair, I don't blame him for thinking this way, just because of some of the comments that the likes of Helmut Marko have made. I mean, if you guys aren't familiar with this, just before we get into this bit, that Helmut Marko said a few weeks ago that he has these fluctuations in form because he's South American. No, he's not South American. Mexico's in North America, and he's not as focused as a Vettel was or a Verstappen was, drivers from Europe, and his implication was that Mexican drivers aren't as good, or just South American drivers aren't as good, which is a ridiculous statement. We discussed it at length at the time, and look, when the likes of Marco are saying this, doesn't paint the sport in a good light, and does it mean that other media sources might be inclined to further criticise Checo because of his nationality? Maybe so, but I think it's far from the main contributing factor in this case, and I do think that, frankly, he's going to be quite lucky to hang on to his seat for next season, because if Red Bull were in a much closer fight this year, then his seat would be far more in jeopardy than it actually is. The reality is, he's P2 in the Drivers' Championship, and Red Bull have never got a 1-2 in a Drivers' Championship. And given how badly he's driven, it does go to show how good that car is. The fact that he's actually P2 in the championship right now. But, you know, he hasn't driven particularly well in a long time, I would say. Yes, the car has gone away from him somewhat, but that's how it always seems to go. And next year, it probably will be the similar story as well. So I still don't think this saga is quite over yet. If he continues to have very poor races with respect to Max, the calls are still going to be there for Red Bull to do something to try and make things interesting. Like, the media wants things to talk about, and if they can try and push for, you know, Norris to Red Bull, it's going to be more entertaining, generally, the Red Bull battle, if it is the fastest car again next year, which it probably will be, than it would be otherwise. So there's a few chances for Checo to redeem himself. I just think he needs to, like, if he can just finish P2 in, like, 4 or 5 of these last 6 races, that's kind of good enough, you know what I mean? But if that isn't the case, then questions are going to be raised. And we know how ruthless Red Bull generally are. Just because his contract ends at the end of next season will not stop them from making a change if they feel like they should, or if they feel like they can actually get an alternative. But the reality is that the driver market is just so well set up for next year's silly season that Red Bull might just wait for then until they can try and acquire the driver that they would actually want. But very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.